Johnny Carson names 8 guests who acted shamefully on his show. One night on The Tonight Show could make your career or destroy it forever. Johnny Carson wasn't just America's favorite host, he was the gatekeeper of fame. Cross one invisible line, disrespect his stage, his crew, or his rules, and you'd never sit on that couch again. Tonight, we're revealing 8 stars who did the unthinkable and paid for it after just one appearance. Tony Clifton, the night Johnny Carson lost control. For 30 years, The Tonight Show was a place of order. Johnny Carson sat at the center of it, calm, unshakable, always in command. Nothing rattled him. No guest, no joke, no surprise. Until one night in 1979, when chaos walked through the studio doors wearing sunglasses, a cigar, and a crooked grin. His name was Tony Clifton. On paper, it was a simple booking. A brash lounge singer. A little rough around the edges. Nothing Johnny Carson hadn't handled 1,000 times before. But what the producers didn't fully understand, and what Johnny would soon regret, was that Tony Clifton wasn't a man. He was a weapon. A character created by comedian Andy Kaufman, designed for one purpose only: to make people uncomfortable and to push authority figures until they snapped. The trouble started before the cameras even rolled. Clifton arrived backstage late, loud, reeking of alcohol, or so it seemed. Staff members braced themselves as he barked orders, insulted assistants, and treated the crew like props in his own private circus. Johnny Carson, ever the professional, tried to pull him aside before airtime. He wanted to set boundaries. He wanted to understand the plan. Clifton didn't listen. Instead, he blew cigar smoke into Johnny's face and sneered. "Relax, Johnny boy. I got this." In that moment, something changed. The cameras turned on, and the disaster began. Clifton staggered through an intentionally awful song, missing notes, mangling lyrics, daring the audience to hate him. The crowd shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Johnny tried to intervene, to steer the moment back toward entertainment. Clifton cut him off. Then came the moment no one was prepared for. Mid-performance, Clifton hurled a glass of water at Doc Severinsen, the show's legendary bandleader. The studio froze. Johnny Carson, the man famous for never losing his composure, had had enough. The show slammed into a commercial break. And when it came back, Tony Clifton was gone. Security dragged him out of the building, kicking and screaming, shouting, "Do you know who I am?" Backstage, Johnny Carson erupted. Witnesses later said it was the only time they ever heard him swear. "Get that expletive out of my building," he said, "and make sure he never comes back." The ban was instant. Absolute. Tony Clifton would never appear on The Tonight Show again. Ironically, Andy Kaufman himself wasn't banned, not at first. Johnny respected commitment to a bit. He even admired risk. But Clifton had crossed a line Johnny never forgave. He didn't just challenge the audience. He didn't just provoke discomfort. He challenged control. And on Johnny Carson's stage, there was only room for one man in charge. That night changed The Tonight Show forever. New rules were written. New safeguards put in place. Because for the first and last time, Johnny Carson lost control of his own show. And he made sure it would never happen again. Madonna, the night fame wasn't enough. By 1987, Madonna didn't walk into rooms. She arrived. She was pop music's reigning provocateur, untouchable, unstoppable, and fully aware of her power. Every move calculated. Every interview a performance. Controversy wasn't a risk to her brand, it was the brand. So when she was booked on The Tonight Show, producers expected fireworks. What they didn't expect was ice. Because Johnny Carson wasn't impressed by hype. He had interviewed presidents, legends, icons who didn't need to announce their importance. And Madonna walked in acting like he was lucky to have her. The tension started before the cameras rolled. Madonna kept Johnny Carson waiting backstage, a quiet but unmistakable insult. To anyone else, it might have seemed trivial. To Johnny, it was unforgivable. Punctuality wasn't just professionalism to him, it was respect. When Madonna finally took her seat on the couch, something felt off immediately. Johnny, normally smooth and effortless, seemed stiff. Madonna radiated restless energy mixed with indifference, answering questions with clipped phrases, half smiles, long silences. Johnny tried everything. Thoughtful questions, gentle humor, even self-deprecation. Nothing landed. Every answer felt like a wall. And then came the moment that sealed her fate. Johnny, searching for common ground, made a light joke about life in the public eye, about fame. Madonna leaned in and delivered what sounded rehearsed. She explained, calmly but condescendingly, that Johnny couldn't possibly understand her level of fame. The studio went quiet. Johnny Carson had interviewed Elvis, Frank Sinatra, the Beatles, men and women who had redefined culture itself. And now he was being lectured about fame by someone he saw as a passing moment. You could see it in his face. The smile tightened, the warmth disappeared. From that second on, Johnny was done. He finished the interview like a professional. No outburst, no confrontation, just distance. But backstage, the verdict was final. When the cameras stopped rolling, Johnny turned to his producer and said dryly, "Well, she was certainly everything we hoped for, wasn't she?" Everyone understood what that meant. Madonna was never officially banned. Johnny Carson rarely needed to say things out loud. He simply stopped inviting her. Her name went onto a list Johnny kept in his head, the list of guests who had disappointed him. And once you were on that list, you stayed there. Years later, when Jay Leno took over the show, Madonna returned. Someone mentioned her old appearance with Carson. Her response? "He didn't get me. I was too real for him." The comment eventually reached Johnny Carson. His reply was short. "Too real?" That would have been refreshing. Madonna's career survived, thrived even. But the message was clear. On The Tonight Show, fame didn't outrank respect. Shock didn't outweigh humility. And no matter how big you thought you were, Johnny Carson never stood up to anyone. They stood up to him. Robert Blake, When Anger Took the Couch. By 1981, Robert Blake was no longer the kid from our gang. He had survived Hollywood's cruelest transformation, child star to serious actor, and earned credibility with Beretta. But behind the success, something was cracking. When Blake walked into The Tonight Show, he didn't come to promote a movie. He came carrying resentment. From the moment he arrived backstage, the tension was palpable. Crew members noticed it instantly, the clenched jaw, the sharp tone, the refusal to engage in small talk. Blake made one thing clear during the pre-interview. He didn't want to play the game. No jokes, no charm, no light conversation. Johnny Carson, as always, believed he could handle it. He had interviewed difficult men before. He trusted his instincts. The cameras rolled. And within seconds, something felt wrong. Blake didn't sit, he occupied the couch. His posture rigid, his eyes fixed, every answer edged with irritation. Johnny tried to steer the conversation gently, asking about Blake's latest film, his collaboration with director Hal Ashby. Blake ignored the question. Instead, he launched into a bitter monologue about Hollywood, about being used, discarded, and forced to smile for studios that didn't care. Johnny attempted to lighten the mood with a joke. Blake cut him off. "I'm not here to be funny," he said. "I'm here to tell the truth." The audience fell silent. On The Tonight Show, humor wasn't optional. It was the language of the room. Johnny tried again. He mentioned Blake's early career as a child actor, hoping to humanize the moment, to find empathy. That was a mistake. Blake leaned forward and unleashed a dark, graphic tirade about exploitation, trauma, and rage, words that felt too heavy, too raw for network television. When Johnny tried to interject, Blake snapped back. "Let me finish," he said. "You get to talk every night." That was the moment. Not because Blake was angry, but because he had challenged Johnny Carson's authority on his own stage. Johnny's smile remained, but the warmth behind it vanished. Those who knew him recognized the expression instantly. The interview limped to the finish line. Johnny stayed professional. The audience applauded out of obligation. But backstage, the decision had already been made. Johnny turned to his producer and said quietly, "No return engagement necessary. No argument. No debate. Robert Blake was finished at The Tonight Show. The timing couldn't have been worse. Beretta was over. Blake was trying to reinvent himself for film. And Johnny Carson's couch was the most powerful promotional platform in America. Without it, doors quietly closed. Years later, a former staffer reflected on that night. There was something dark in him, they said. Anger that didn't switch off when the cameras came on. Johnny sensed it immediately. Johnny Carson didn't ban people because they were honest. He banned them because they were uncontrolled. And Robert Blake walked onto that stage already at war with the world. Johnny simply refused to join the fight. Truman Capote, when genius couldn't be saved. There was a time when Truman Capote didn't need an introduction. His voice alone commanded a room. Sharp, playful, impossibly intelligent. A man whose words could mesmerize an audience without effort. Johnny Carson loved having him on The Tonight Show. Capote was wit incarnate, unpredictable, elegant, brilliant. But in 1975, when Truman Capote walked into the studio for what would become his final appearance, something was unmistakably wrong. He wasn't drunk in the usual way. He was gone. Backstage, producers exchanged worried glances. Capote's speech was slurred. His movements unsteady. It wasn't just alcohol, it was something deeper, heavier. There was quiet debate about canceling the segment. Johnny Carson made the call. "He's Truman Capote," he said. "Let's see if I can guide him through." The cameras rolled. And the audience immediately felt it. Capote slumped into the chair, eyes unfocused, sentences dissolving halfway through. Thoughts wandered. Stories trailed off into silence. Johnny went to work. What followed was a masterclass in live television triage. Johnny completed Capote's thoughts when he couldn't. Turned fragments into questions. Smoothed over pauses with humor that gently carried the weight for both of them. For a while it almost worked. Until Capote crossed into dangerous territory. He began dropping names. Whispering gossip. Hinting at private lives, scandals, accusations, things that couldn't be taken back once spoken. Johnny's tone shifted. He redirected. Changed subjects. Smiled while signaling the control booth. But Capote kept circling back. The brilliance that once dazzled now unraveled into recklessness. Johnny grew visibly concerned, not angry, not embarrassed, concerned. When Capote began making explicit claims about real people, Johnny made the call. The segment ended early. For a guest of Capote's stature, that almost never happened. When the cameras stopped, the room was quiet. There was no shouting, no condemnation, just a sense of loss. Johnny didn't ban Truman Capote. He understood the difference between a difficult guest and a gifted man falling apart. Instead, he issued a quiet pause. "Let's give Truman some time," he told the booking team. Time to get himself together. That time never came. Capote's addiction worsened. His health declined. The sharp wit that once defined him faded into isolation. By the time Johnny might have considered inviting him back, Truman Capote was already slipping away. He died in 1984, never returning to The Tonight Show. That night changed Johnny Carson. After Capote, new rules emerged. If a guest arrived unable to fully remember the interview the next morning, they wouldn't do it at all. Because Johnny Carson believed in protecting the audience. And sometimes, protecting the guest from themselves. Truman Capote didn't lose his place on the couch because he misbehaved. He lost it because genius, once left unattended, can quietly destroy itself. Don Rickles, when the joke went too far. For years, Don Rickles was the exception. On The Tonight Show, he was allowed to do what no one else dared. Mock Johnny Carson to his face. He insulted Johnny's suit, his hair, his timing, his ego. And Johnny loved it. The audience loved it. Their chemistry was legendary because it was built on trust. An unspoken agreement that the insults were theater, not betrayal. But even comedy has borders. And Don Rickles knew where they were. Or at least he thought he did. One night in the early 1970s, Rickles took the couch as usual, guns blazing. The crowd roared as he unloaded joke after joke at Johnny's expense. Johnny played along. The fake outrage, the raised eyebrow, the perfect straight man. Everything was working. until Rickles reached for a final punchline. This time, he didn't joke about Johnny the host. He joked about Johnny the man, about his recent divorce, about the alimony, about the part of Johnny's life no one was supposed to touch. The audience laughed, but the crew didn't. For just a fraction of a second, Johnny's smile disappeared. It wasn't the performative irritation Rickles fans were used to. This was real. Johnny recovered instantly. The professional mask snapped back into place. Most viewers never noticed, but everyone backstage knew. Rickles had crossed the line. The segment ended smoothly. No confrontation, no explosion. But behind the curtain, Johnny made his feelings clear. "Let's give Don some time off," he told the booking team. In Carson language, that meant exile. Rickles wasn't banned forever, but he was gone. Weeks passed. The months. For a comedian who appeared regularly on The Tonight Show, the silence was deafening. Rickles knew he'd messed up. He just didn't know how to fix it. So he did what only Don Rickles would do. At a Dean Martin roast, with Johnny Carson sitting quietly in the audience, Rickles broke character. He pointed straight at Johnny and said, "I'm not afraid of you. But I'm a little afraid of you. Please let me back on the show." The room exploded with laughter. Johnny laughed too. Really laughed. After the roast, Johnny turned to his producer and said, "I think Don's been in exile long enough." Rickles returned to The Tonight Show shortly after. Wiser, more careful, and never again joking about Johnny's private life. The incident revealed something crucial about Johnny Carson. He could take a joke. He could even take humiliation. But he demanded respect. Friendship didn't grant immunity. Comedy didn't excuse betrayal. On that couch, laughter was welcome, but only as long as it didn't come at the cost of dignity. Chevy Chase, the man who acted like the throne was empty. In the late 1970s, Chevy Chase was everywhere. He was the breakout star of Saturday Night Live, the face of a new generation of comedy. Young, confident, and convinced the future belonged to him. So when Johnny Carson took one of his routine vacations in 1977, Chevy Chase seemed like the perfect substitute. Temporary host. 1 week. A simple fill-in. But Chevy didn't see it that way. From the moment he stepped into the Tonight Show studio, something felt off. He didn't act like a guest host. He acted like a successor. Backstage, the attitude surfaced quickly. Chevy brushed off advice from producers who had worked with Johnny for years. Dismissed the show's format as outdated. Joked, not kindly, that late night needed to be dragged into the future. The staff didn't laugh. These were people fiercely loyal to Johnny Carson. They had built the most successful talk show in television history. And here was a young star treating it like a relic. Rehearsals were tense. Chevy insisted on doing things his way, ignoring rhythm, structure, and the delicate balance Johnny had perfected over decades. On air, the cracks widened. Chevy leaned heavily on physical comedy, pratfalls, interruptions, awkward bits lifted straight from SNL. But The Tonight Show wasn't sketch comedy. Guests would be making serious points, and suddenly Chevy would fall out of his chair. The momentum died every time. Still, none of that sealed his fate. What did was how he treated the people no one saw on camera. Crew members reported condescension. Producers felt dismissed. Suggestions were met with sarcasm or silence. When Johnny Carson returned from vacation, the complaints poured in. Johnny listened carefully. He didn't get angry. He got protective. Those staff members weren't replaceable to him. They were family. And that was enough. Chevy Chase never returned to The Tonight Show. No announcement. No explanation. He simply vanished from the couch. When publicists later reached out to promote his films, they were politely told the schedule was full, Hollywood shorthand for never happening. The irony was brutal. Before that week, Johnny Carson had actually admired Chevy Chase. Some say he even considered him a possible future heir to the show. That door closed forever. Years later, Chevy admitted the truth. "Not being welcome on Johnny's show hurt my career," he said. "When you can't get on the biggest talk show in America, that matters." He was young. He was arrogant. And he misunderstood the room. Johnny Carson didn't fear being replaced. But he demanded loyalty. And the moment Chevy Chase treated the throne like it was already his, Johnny made sure it stayed occupied. Charles Grodin, the joke Johnny wasn't warned about. Charles Grodin was never loud. He didn't shout. He didn't mug for the camera. He didn't chase laughs. His weapon was discomfort. By the early 1970s, Grodin had mastered a deadpan style so dry, so confrontational, that audiences weren't always sure if he was joking, and that was the point. But what worked beautifully in films became something else entirely on The Tonight Show. In 1973, Grodin sat down on Johnny Carson's couch with a plan. The problem was, no one else knew it. Not the producers. Not the pre-interview team. And most importantly, not Johnny. The cameras rolled. And almost immediately, the tone shifted. Instead of the usual friendly banter, Grodin challenged Johnny, calmly, politely, relentlessly. He questioned why Johnny hadn't read his book, why he hadn't seen his latest film. Johnny explained, reasonably, that time was limited. Grodin didn't accept it. He pressed harder. Each response sharper than the last, wrapped in politeness, delivered without a smile. The audience didn't know how to react. Was this real hostility? Was it a bit? Was Johnny being attacked? Even the crew wasn't sure. Johnny realized quickly that Grodin was playing a character, a difficult, combative guest. But he'd been ambushed. If Johnny acknowledged the bit, the tension would vanish. If he pushed back too hard, he risked looking cruel or defensive. He was trapped. So Johnny did what he always did. He held the line. He responded with composure, let Grodin's comments hang in the air, offered reactions just exaggerated enough to keep the audience from panicking. But beneath the calm, frustration simmered. The interview ended without explosion. No scandal, no obvious disaster. Just unease. Backstage, Johnny didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply told his producers, next time someone wants to come on and play a character, I'd like to know beforehand. That was it. Charles Grodin wasn't banned outright. He was something worse. He was forgotten. For years, his agents called. His projects needed promotion. The schedule was always full. Hollywood code for no. Eventually, Grodin was invited back, but only after boundaries were set. Johnny knew the character now. He could prepare. And once prepared, Johnny fought back. Those later appearances became legendary, mock arguments, perfectly choreographed discomfort, comedy sharpened by consent. Years later, Grodin admitted the truth. I threw Johnny into the deep end without warning, he said. He liked spontaneity, but he liked knowing the direction. The lesson was clear. Johnny Carson didn't fear being challenged. He feared being blindsided. Surprise could create magic, or it could quietly end your invitation forever. Bette Davis, when a legend tried to take the wheel. By 1972, Bette Davis was untouchable. 2 Academy Awards. Decades of iconic performances. A face carved into the foundation of Hollywood itself. She wasn't a guest. She was history. So when Bette Davis agreed to appear on The Tonight Show, the production team prepared accordingly. Carefully, respectfully. But no one was prepared for what she brought with her. An entourage. A list of demands. And an expectation that the show would bend. Special lighting. Approved camera angles. A list of forbidden questions. A request that no other guests appear that night. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a declaration. The producers did what they could. They adjusted the lights. Briefed Johnny on off-limit topics. Gave her the coveted first guest slot. But they drew one line. The show would not be hers alone. Bette Davis was furious. The tension followed her onto the set. On camera, viewers saw elegance, respect, a calm conversation between a master interviewer and a Hollywood icon. Behind the scenes, it was something else entirely. Bette Davis gestured at camera operators mid-interview, spoke directly to the lighting director, asked Johnny to shift his position because the light wasn't flattering. She wasn't participating in the show. She was directing it. Johnny Carson noticed everything. He said nothing. Until the commercial break. That's when Bette Davis began issuing instructions, changes she wanted made before they returned to air. Johnny listened. Then he responded calmly, firmly. "Miss Davis," he said, "this is how we do the show. If that doesn't work for you, we can end the interview now." The message was unmistakable. When the cameras came back on, Betty Davis finished the segment professionally. Graceful. Controlled. But the damage was done. When she left the studio, Johnny turned to his producer and said quietly, "That's quite enough of Miss Davis." There was no anger. No insult. Just finality. Betty Davis was never invited back. Not because she was demanding. Johnny had tolerated difficult personalities before. But because she tried to take control. Johnny Carson saw himself as the captain of his ship. And he would not surrender the wheel. Not to fame. Not to ego. Not even to legend. That night changed how The Tonight Show operated. From then on, the rule was clear. We will accommodate you before the cameras roll. But once the red light is on, this is Johnny's show. Betty Davis left as she arrived, a legend. But she learned what everyone eventually did. On The Tonight Show, there was only one star that never dimmed. And his name was Johnny Carson. Johnny Carson didn't ban people because they were famous. He banned them because they forgot something more important than fame, respect. On his stage, power didn't belong to ego, controversy, or legend. It belonged to professionalism, control, and trust. Every guest who crossed that line learned the same lesson. One night on that couch could define your legacy forever. So now we ask you, which guest went too far? Which ban was justified, and which one wasn't? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Like the video if you felt the tension. Subscribe if you want more untold Hollywood stories. Because some legends are built on what happens after the cameras stop rolling.